All right, it says I'm live. I decided to start on time and vamp for a couple of minutes to see if YouTube will actually put a little notification out there, excuse me, and say, hey, Primal Scream is on, time for book club. So, Annette Babcock, I do see you. Thank you so much for being here. If there's anyone else there lurking, welcome. And I would prefer you not lurk if you at least just say hello in the chat so I know you're there. But it might just be me and Annette tonight, and that's okay too. That's fine with me. So I'm going to vamp a little bit while we wait to see if anybody else shows up. I'm in Florida, and I just heard some thunder in the distance. We don't usually lose power if there's a storm, and of course, there's no guarantee it's going to come this way anyway. But if for some reason I should go completely out, because I will lose my Wi-Fi, obviously, that would be the reason why, because we're having a storm. I also want to apologize on the front end because I have my husband's here in our regular TV room listening to I think it's a Jason Bourne movie. It's just on the other side of the wall opposite me. And he likes to listen to things really loud because he thinks it's like surround sound. So we'll see if he turns it down or if there's an issue. Annette says, I got behind, so I'm trying to read the last few pages, get the last few pages read. So we'll let you do that. I'm going to just give it a couple more minutes to see if Sandy McKenna might show up again, or if Keela McDonald. I know they both have been here. There's been a couple other people too. So just give it a couple of minutes. So my tired eyes, I started a part-time job this week, and I spent Monday and Tuesday in and out of the heat, getting in and out of my car. About the time my air gets working good, I'm at the next stop and I have to get out. And it just was so hot. And I worked pretty solid 8 hours both days, Monday and Tuesday. Hi, Sandy McKenna. So my eyes just got really tired from driving around for 2 days in the sun, getting in and out of the car in the heat. Today I worked from home, but I did it on the computer for about 4 hours because I'm only part-time. So yeah, my eyes are kind of tired. So more than usual, I have to like take the glasses off to read because the reading part of my progressive lenses is no longer the right strength, whatever you want to say, prescription. So you'll see me doing that a little bit more than usual, probably, and doing a little bit of squinting when I'm trying to see who's talking and what they're saying. So let me see, how far are we in? We're about 3 minutes in. I'm going to give it about another minute. I'm going to do a song and dance. And not really, just going to vamp here to see if anybody else joins us, because I know I usually get YouTube notifications that somebody has gone live, like Aaron with Growing Up in Scientology. But then once I actually get in there, he's already a good 2 or 3 minutes in sometimes. So I almost never get to see one really from the beginning without backing up and putting it on fast speed to catch up. So, all right, Annette, how are you coming on those last few pages? Oh, Annette, sorry, I missed your comment here. And it says, if the storm gets bad enough and you feel the need to get off, feel free. I don't keep my computer on in storms. It's really literally in the distance right now. So I just heard like a little rumbling in the distance. If it starts to get a little louder, we'll talk. But I actually have a lot in this section that I noted. And I was looking at my notes going, oh my God, this is going to take forever. I'm going to try to go quickly, but I don't want to skip over anything you guys want to talk about. So as we're going, if you have some things that you want to discuss, specific events or specific pages or parts of pages, I want you to tell me in the chat so we can stop and talk about that, because I'll sit here and talk all day. I have proven that. But I would love to hear more from you guys. If there's anything specific that you want to talk about as we go through. Sandy says, I would like to compliment you on the book club and how much I enjoy it. Thank you, Sandy. I got really excited. Was it yesterday, day before? My days are running together. But when Natalie over at Scientology Life After a Cult gave us a shout out and did a little clip. She did a little clip. I was listening to it in my car. It was yesterday, because I was listening to it in my car between 2 towns that I do marketing in. It's about a 25-minute drive. And I was listening to her, and I had the phone on, but I had it down where I couldn't see it because I had it on a speaker to listen to. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, is that she's talking about the SPTV Book Club? Now I know there's another one, so I was a little concerned it might be that one. But then she pulled up the clip, and it was us. I was so excited. So maybe we'll have a couple more people from that. Maybe not. We don't know. But I felt very special that Natalie did a shout out. And as you guys know, I think most of you know, she's the reason I started this, because she said something about she would love a book club with SPTV material, etc. And I was like, you know what? That's something I can do. I think that might be my little niche when it comes to SPTV, because I'm never in. I don't really know anybody in Scientology. I have long thought that it was a cult. I love Aaron's content. I love Natalie's content. I love Nora's content. Anybody, all the people doing it, but I don't really have anything to contribute, so I really can't be part of it. But then the book club, I was like, yeah, I think maybe I can. So shout out to Natalie at Scientology Life After a Cult for giving us a shout out. So I see that we have, according to my phone monitoring, there's 4 in the room, but I might be one of them. I'm not sure how that works. So, because I'm on my phone under my personal account, is I like to monitor on there in case something goes wrong. If it goes blank for you guys, I might not see it here. So, but I can see it on my phone if it does. Okay, so let's get started. So where we left off at the end of chapter 21, Jenna was basically being forced to go back to LA. They packed all her bags up. They were not really suitcases. They shoved stuff in bags, and they told her she was going home. But to her, Flag was home, and that's where she was. But no, they were sending her back to LA. So this is where we're starting, chapter 22 on page 258, where it's titled LA. So I'm going to put these up. Sandy says, I love a book club I can attend in my pajamas. I wish I could attend it in my pajamas. I actually kind of dressed up a little for you guys for 4th of July and wear my red, white, and blue. I almost wore a different shirt. This is actually a little dress, but I almost wore a red, white, and blue shirt, but it had so much white, and I thought that would wash out on camera, so I just went with the little dress. I know this kind of looks purple on my screen. I hope it looks blue for you guys, because that's blue. It's really red, white, and blue, I promise. Annette agrees with Sandy. Yes, Sandy, that is the best. So, all right, so my first note is not very far in. It's on page 260, and here we go with the glasses. Glasses on and off, right? So the first thing I marked was, right here. It's at the top of page 260 if you're reading in a book. First, I realized that everything I had just been through, the months of security checks, bathroom cleaning, the CMO EPF uniform, and separation from Martino and my friends, was not because of something I had done, but because my parents were leaving the Sea Org, which surprised me and pissed me off. So I had 2 things on this. The first one is she's talking about being pissed off, and I feel like this is kind of the start of some of her anger that we see later on as we go through the rest of the book, because her anger does increase. But I kind of wondered, if I don't remember her being quite this angry sounding, because she used the word pissed. So I felt like she was super, super angry there. And then what's the second thing I had here? Oh, and just the fact that in Scientology, you can be punished for something somebody else does that's connected to you. I mean, I know we all kind of know that, but that just kind of struck me as I was reading it. I was like, who does that? I guess a cult does that, right? But it just struck me as, oh my word, you get punished for things you don't do, something somebody else did, for something her parents did, nothing that she was doing. So if anybody has any thoughts about that, that was my first note. And then I have the next one on the next page, 261. Here we go again with Jenna getting angry. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I'm glad Jenna's getting angry in this, because Lord knows, to me, she needed to be angry. This is towards the bottom of 261. Then I thought of my parents leaving. I grew angry just thinking about how selfish they were, that they didn't even consider or care that I had my own life now, a life that I had been forced to create because of their choices for me. So 2 things again, anger. So she's getting angry again at her parents. And also, she's acknowledging here that her parents forced her into this life. They made these choices that put her here, and now they're leaving. And she doesn't want to leave at this point, because that's all she knows, and this is her life, right? This is what she knows, is Scientology. I can't imagine growing up in a cult like this and it being all that you know. I mean, I guess we all have that to a certain extent. Our childhood, our lives, it's what we know. But how sad is it that what you know from your childhood is cult behavior? It just blows my mind sometimes. It blows my mind. All right. Now I'm going to move on to 267 unless you guys have anything to say, Miss Annette and Miss Sandy. If you guys have anything, and anybody lurking out there, feel free to chat, give a chat. And while I'm thinking about it, if you like the book club, if you're not subscribed already, please subscribe. Please like this video and please push the notification bell and hopefully you will get notified. Maybe. We all know how YouTube is. So Annette says, yes, from this point forward, I was thinking that Scientology had shot themselves in the foot from the beginning. It is not something new. Yep. You can only do the crap they do for so long and rebellion will happen. Exactly. Sandy says, done and done. Thank you, Sandy, for subscribing and liking and all the things. I appreciate that. So yeah, Annette, you are so right. And I make some comments later through this last section of the book about Scientology going too far because they really have a way of kind of taking things too far. Let's see, what's my next note? So my next note is on 267. I'm at the bottom of the page again, and it says, finally, both mom and dad agreed they would not put up a legal fight to make me leave, convinced I wanted to stay. Painful as it had been, I breathed a huge sigh of relief. And what I wrote on my margin is Scientology destroys families. And I know we know that. I know we hear that from Natalie and from Aaron especially, all the time. But that just really right there brought it home to me. And this was in a different way and than kind of what we're used to as far as I'm talking about Scientology destroying families. In this case, Jenna wants to stay and the parents are leaving. It's just the people we know. Aaron left and other people in his family stayed that were older generation, some of them. So it's kind of odd that there's a twist on it a little bit. Although Phil Jones and his family, I know that's how it worked with them. They left and they have kids still in. So again, there's Scientology showing that they do like to destroy families. All right, I'm going to move to 272. If you have comments, just make them when you want to make them. Lurkers, feel free to make comments too. We are very non-judgmental here. This is very relaxed, very casual, nothing to be afraid of here. Okay, 272 oh man, I got quite a bit here. So this is where Jenna had been having conversations with her parents with permission. And I hate to even say it that way, but with permission. So she says here, now I had to do a session of the truth rundown, a procedure to uncover the black PR, the bad propaganda that was going to be directed, that I had been exposed to during my conversation with my parents. So Scientology says it's black PR. Rika says, I'm lurking. LOL. I haven't read the book, but I adore Jenna and really like your vibe and breakdown of the book. Oh, thank you, Rika. Appreciate that. Then thanks for being here. So again, we're going back to she's been talking to her parents, but now they're going to uncover the black PR or the bad propaganda she'd been exposed to when talking to her parents. She says, I was going to be directed to the moment when I had believed what my parents had told me. And once I found that, I had to locate the overt I had committed just before that moment, which had led me to believe it. Is that convoluted to you guys? That sounds pretty convoluted to me. I see it was, looking back now, I see it was the ultimate brainwashing technique. And it really is. So let's read that again. I was going to be directed to the moment when I had believed what my parents had told me. So the assumption is the parents are lying. And once I found that, I had to locate the overt I had committed just before that moment, which means the sin she had committed just before she believed her parents' lies, supposed lies, which had led me to believe it. Looking back now, it was the ultimate brainwashing technique. And I can see how that's brainwashing. But here's the other part that really got me out the very, very bottom of this page. Eventually, so she kept saying there was nothing, right? Eventually, I made up some moment in time and its earlier overt and withhold, and we finished the session. So she lied. She lied to just finish the session. So to me, so Scientology does a lot of things. Scientology brainwashes people. Scientology traffics people, children included in that. Scientology uses people as free labor in servitude, almost really slavehood. Lots of bad things, but to me, this is almost just as egregious. They not only are they brainwashing, they are training people to lie to protect themselves. Training children to lie to protect themselves. Now, I've talked about this before. I'm not a real parent. I'm a bonus parent, as somebody liked to say. I think that was Keela who called me a bonus parent. I'm a stepmom, and I have 7 grandchildren, step grandchildren. So I'm not a real mom. But I know that with children, we don't teach children to lie. We teach them not to lie. We teach them that lying is worse than, will get them in more trouble than telling the truth about something they did, which might get them in trouble, but not as much as if they lie about it. So it just struck me that, gosh, Scientology is just so insidious. There's just so many things of Scientology that are just insidiously evil, in my opinion. And again, please, please comment. I'm looking to see if anybody's commented. Not yet. So please comment. Please put your opinions in. This is my opinion. Your mileage may vary. So I have no problem civilly debating a difference of opinion. If you think I'm wrong about something, please, please chime in and tell me. I don't have a problem with that. So if you don't have anything to say here, ladies or gentlemen, too, I don't know, Rika, if you're male or female. I should not make that assumption. But in any case, people, folks, we are moving on. I'm going to move on now to page 274. This is where Jenna is basically now being held prisoner. She is being held prisoner at this point in the book. I have 3 things marked all on this one page. Several times during the course, it even crossed my mind that I felt more suppressed by the organization. So they're talking about suppressive people, and that she's learning all about people being suppressive and suppressive acts. But she's saying it crossed my mind that I felt more suppressed by the organization, by Scientology, than she did by people who are supposedly suppressive people. And then a little further down, she's under lock and key pretty much. I couldn't go anywhere unless it was the bathroom, and for that, I had to knock on Mr. H's door to get permission and secure an escort. She couldn't even go to the bathroom without an escort. If any of you watched The Lifeboat and Tommy Scoville at The Lifeboat and talking about when he did, even if you saw interviews with Aaron, when he talks about life in prison, because he is an ex-con, that's like being in prison. If you're being escorted to the bathroom, like they get escorted to the shower in prison at certain levels of lockup, but still you get escorted to everything. This is prison. I'm sorry about it. I've got a frog. I've got some water out here. I don't remember what Doug used to say, but whatever Doug used to say right here, take a sip of water. Maybe that will help. Non-binary she, they. Thank you for that, Rika. Appreciate that. So I'll just say folks from here on out. Okay. So, and folks is not a derogatory. I'm a Southern girl. So Southerners, we say folks all the time. And that means my folks. Like if I say my folks, that's my family. So folks is a good word. And then a little bit further, just a few sentences down. This is really another thing that Scientology does. The reward for my loyalty was more punishment. More punishment. Rewarding loyalty with more punishment. Have you guys ever watched anything on this guy on Facebook? And I think his name's Ben Askins. I think that's his last name. And he does the HR or the bad bosses or the world's worst boss number 157, etc. He talks a lot about that sometimes, about employees' loyalty being rewarded with basically punishment, more work. You did great. So we're not going to promote you or give you any more money. We're just going to give you more work to do. So that kind of reminded me of that. So Sandy says we're talking about this punishment and being under lock and key. Every thought, every movement is controlled. Exactly. It's like being in prison. Rika says, I'm Southern too. So I'm in Florida. I don't know where you are, but and I'm rural Florida. I'm not Miami, Orlando, Jacksonville, Florida. I'm rural Florida. So born and raised. And Annette says, we say folks here in the North too. That's good to hear. I just know I've seen somewhere recently that people were saying folks, using the word folks was derogatory in some way. And I couldn't figure out why, since I use that for like my own family. Sandy McKenna's in Tampa Bay. So we're not in all Florida content. Oh, I guess she's Florida. Rika probably is not Florida. I don't know where Annette is. So let's see. Rika says, born and raised in rural Florida, been in Oregon 25, born and raised in Florida, in rural Florida, been in Oregon 25 years now. I have a really good friend who moved out to Seattle. So not exactly in this, but same general part of the country. And she loves it there. And she was born in the Caribbean, Virgin Islands, but she loves it there. I don't understand. I like my heat. I'm a Florida girl. So, okay. So rewarding loyalty with punishment. And now I'm going to move over to the next page. I'm telling you guys, I put so many notes down because so much of this was just, it's like the beginning was a little slow, but it needed to be to build the sort of the foundation of everything. And then we picked up in that middle section, and now things just go really fast in this last section. And it says, I am coast of Maine near Acadia National Park. Ooh, I bet that's beautiful. I bet that's gorgeous there. All right, so I'm going to go on to page 275. Right at the very top, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was really depressed at having been cut off from everyone I cared about. At mealtime, I hardly ate. So I'm really glad that Jenna acknowledged the depression issue here, because I think a lot of her anger was probably also rooted in depression through all this stuff, and rightly so. But I just thought that was interesting that she acknowledged it here. And of course, it's something that would not be recognized in Scientology, because you can't get therapy for that. You have to go get audited and on the cans and find out what you did to pull that depression in, right? Going to try not to be angry as we talk about some of this stuff, but just like the last section, a lot of this made me angry and pretty sad in some places. And then down about halfway, I had chosen the church over my parents, and yet for that loyalty, I was being punished. Again, loyalty being punished. Rather than recognize my sacrifice by returning me to Clearwater, their response was to strip me of my freedoms and regiment my life. Again, this is one of the first places where I'm like, Scientology is just takes things a little too far. It's like we start with kind of a good, hey, we need to get this under control. We need to fix this problem. And then they just go a little too far and cross that line so many times. And then real quick, there was another line. Depressed, I was prone to bouts of crying that I tried to hide in the bathroom or in my room at night. And that made me so sad. I don't know if any of you have ever suffered from depression. I did go through a bit of a depression in my 20s, which was a good 30 years ago now. Didn't realize I was in a depression, but I had stopped eating, not completely, but enough that I lost some severe weight, and I was thin. I was already a thin dancer person. So I was down to 100. I'm 5'6". I always have been since I was 12, and I was 105 pounds, which was too small. I looked like I had this giant head, and I don't have a big head on this small little body. It was kind of weird. But once I realized I was depressed, I actually did do something about it. I did get some counseling and some help, but it just made me sad to know that she was going through this, and yet she couldn't get any real help for it. There was no real help to be had because Scientology just doesn't do that. You're not allowed. You're not allowed to have that kind of help. You got to get on the cans, right? All right. Any thoughts on that? Anybody want to talk about anything with that? You guys might be typing away, but we got a lot to move through. So I'm going to keep going. We will back up if we need to. It's fine. So I'm going to go to 277, right, sort of near the top. Jenna was talking about this was a Christmas that she didn't get to spend with her family, and she was so used to spending it with her family and it being festive. She did get to go out to dinner with her two jailers, for lack of a better word, Mr. H and Mr. Rodriguez. But she says that the best part of Christmas that year was that Mr. Marty Rathbun sent me a present, my first Harry Potter book. And that just reminded me so much of my niece. My niece is such a Harry Potter fan. And I thought that was actually a nice thing for Marty to do. We hear all the time about what a bad guy Marty Rathbun was and is. And again, I was been shocked to this book that his wife was really just as bad, if not worse. But he did some nice things for Jenna like that. And like even today on her live, she did I think it was today, her live for her, when she's doing the clay stuff on her channel today, Jenna, she was talking about, I just was going somewhere. Totally blank where I was going with that. Oh, she's talking about how she left and was walking, as she describes in the book, and Marty followed her in the car and then took her up to the overlook there. So there was parts of him that were nice, and then of course he left her there and came back, but still. So she said she stayed up late in the night and finished it, and she loved it, and it was an escape from her actual life. So that was, again, a sad part there, that the best thing in her life was a Harry Potter book. And that helped her escape in her mind from what was going on around her. Makes me sad. It makes me angry. Anybody got anything to say? Be saying it. I'm not seeing anything. Okay. All right. Going to move on. There's so much to cover. Page 278. So she ended up getting posted as a word clearer. Not what she really wanted to do, but here she is now. She's a word clearer. She was given an office to use. It was outfitted with a surveillance camera. So they put a freaking surveillance camera in her office for her, where she's posted. A surveillance camera just for her in her office. Yes, I know some businesses have surveillance cameras in their businesses. I know that. But the people there know that it's going to be there, and it's not just for them. It's for everybody, and it's for security and all that. This is to keep her under control. That's the only reason that surveillance camera is there, is to keep her under control. Again, that just struck me as like a surveillance camera in her office. All right, okay, so that's 278. Moving on to 283. Come on, Annette and Sandy. I am counting on you guys. And Rika, too. I'm counting on you guys to have some things to say. All right, I'm going to move to 283. We are still on, right? We're still streaming because it says I'm still streaming. So hope you guys are still there. Okay, here I'm on 283. In the end, I got it over with, confessed, and never spoke another word to my Italian friend. So this was the Italian guy that she had gotten friends with. Hi, Sandy. Thanks for saying you're here. So she had befriended this Italian guy, but she got in trouble and all this stuff. And so she, again, in the end, I got it over with, confessed, and never again spoke another word to my Italian friend. Upset as I was about it, having received so many security checks, right? During which both the auditor and I knew that half of what I was saying wasn't true. Ending a session with a false confession was nothing new. Again, and I put in the margin here, forced lies. Again, being forced to lie just to get it over with, because otherwise you're going to end up doing it forever. Right, Rika? Right? It's sad. It's all very, very sad. At least we know there's a happy ending, right? That's the only way I got through this book, as I knew there was going to be a happy ending. So, and then flipping over to page 284. Here we go, middle of the page. Your loyalty was always supposed to be to the group, not to any individual, which was part of the reason why we were all encouraged to be suspicious of each other, so that we would never trust each other and always put the group's well-being first. If that's not definition of an occult, I don't know what is. And again, it's such a brainwashing thing. You have to be loyal to the group, not to people, not to individuals, not to friends, not to family, not to people who treat you well, right? You have to put the group's well-being first. So culty. So freaking culty. And she's so young, and there's all these children that she grew up with were so young when they were having all this drilled into them. It infuriates me. I think about my own grandchildren now who range from age 3 to 20, and I'm like, there's no way. And I say this, I don't know that I would actually be able to physically do it or legally do it, but if one of mine got sucked into something like that, I would fight tooth and nail literally to pull them out, mainly because of hearing these stories and how horrible this stuff is. I mean, cults are cults, right? But not all of them are violent and terrible. This one's violent and terrible, and I would always be afraid that whatever they got into might be as well. Sandy says, that was something that really disturbed me. No one could be trusted, right? Exactly. You can't trust anyone. And she finds that out through this book. There are times she thinks she's got a friend who's going to hold her secret and keep her secret, and they don't. We're going to find out later, right, that Dallas even came forth with information she thought he would keep secret. But he was, brainwashed like she was. So we'll get to that part. All right. So I'm going to move to 288 down at the bottom. Let's see, who is this? Okay. So this is her parents. Her parents came to visit, right? When they got to LA, they were told by Uncle Dave to meet him and Aunt Shelley at their hotel, which was by the airport. Years later, Mom told me that by the time she and Dad arrived, their frustration was peaking. The first thing Uncle Dave did when they walked through the door was to try to calm them down. You are going to see Jenna, he assured them. It was never my intention to keep her from you. I think it probably was his intention, but he thought there might be too much of a flap, as they would say, too much of a PR flap, and it would get out of control if he did keep her from them. So I just found that interesting. And it's interesting. It's like Jenna and probably Justin and Sterling too. And I don't even, what's the third brother? Nathan, I think is his name. I think it's like in some ways they were given privileges, but in some ways they were much harsher on them as well, because they were Miscaviges and related, to dear leader, as they would say. Okay, so that was page 288. Any comments on anything with that? All right, I'm going to move on. And I said and 289. I continued on the next page. The meeting was all about PR and appeasement. He told them how Marty and Mike, so that would be Marty Rathbun and Mike Render, were messing up handling them, and he was going to take charge of the situation himself. They could even have his hotel room for a couple of days. He was basically appeasing them in any way he could, even giving my father some of his back pay. He added there would no longer be a restriction on their communication with me. So I find that very interesting that Dave had to backpedal a little bit. And, we find out as we go through this book that a lot of what was going on with Jenna was actually being directed by Uncle Dave. The bad stuff, the negative stuff. Again, can't trust your own family, right? Okay, 290, 2/3 of the way down. So she was talking about the day she got to spend with her parents. So she was able to spend the day with her parents. They did a bunch of things, went shopping, did some stuff. We spent the first part of the day shopping at Universal City Walk. Occasionally, I felt guilty for enjoying myself. Now, if you've ever been raised or lived in a family group where you're not supposed to enjoy things, if you have a narcissistic parent, controlling parents, I did not. Thank God. I had really, really good parents. My husband did not. His mother checks off a lot of boxes for narcissistic personality disorder. She's still alive. She's in her 80s and in a nursing home now. He doesn't see her, refuses to ever see her again because of how she treated him most of his life. And he's an only child and Italian, but he will not see her. So I think if you've ever grown up with somebody like that in your life, you can understand this. If I felt guilty for enjoying myself, because you're not supposed to enjoy yourself, and especially in a cult like Scientology. Any thoughts on that from anybody? Going to keep going to 291. The very top, by acting kind and not trying to change my mind, they were laying the groundwork for me to leave on my own. So she's talking about her parents here. They did not tell her you need to leave the church. They weren't mean to her. They didn't yell at her. They didn't try to coerce her. They just had a very pleasant time, and they were kind and gentle with her. And Jenna acknowledges here that they were laying that foundation for her to eventually leave. And God bless her parents for doing that. And I know, her parents are not innocent in all of this. They had their own issues being in the cult and being in leadership positions, especially her mom. But at least once they were out, they knew how to do this the right way and not the Scientology way, and to lay that foundation so eventually Jenna maybe would leave. Okay. Annette says she's sorry she had to take a call, so she's going to go back and listen to what was missed. That's fine. You can put me on fast speed, but I'll probably sound like a chipmunk because I have such a high-pitched voice. This is about as low as my voice gets. It's not very low, unfortunately. All right, so I'm going to move on. That was 291, and we're on 292 now. This is her and Dallas. She and Dallas are having a little relationship here. This is early on in the relationship. They were still friends, but right at the very end of this chapter, chapter 24, before we said goodnight, he leaned over, put his hand on mine, and we kissed. What a day it had been. So that was where she and Dallas first got a spark. Oh, yes, Sandy. You're absolutely right. That is a lesson for today's protesters. And I think I make a note about that somewhere else in here. That the protesters could learn from that, to use the kindness. As Natalie's My Tony would say, be humble and be kind, right? It's a very, very good point. All right, so let's move on. I'm going to move on to, where am I, 292? To 295, about halfway down. So Dallas, as you might remember, grew up in a fairly normal house. They were public Scientologists, not in the Sea Org, not on staff. So he had a regular childhood, doing regular kid things, but their church was Scientology. So they just did the church stuff on church time, and the rest of the time they had a family life. Jenna never had that. So this made me very sad. About halfway down, she said, I would replay Dallas's stories in my head when I got into bed in the evenings, wishing that they could have been mine. I feel so sad for these children who had no childhood, who don't have true childhood memories to reminisce about when they're older and later in life. I'm so blessed that I had really good parents. I have great memories of doing things as family, both my immediate family, my cousins, my grandparents. And it's just so freaking sad to me that these children don't have that to look back on. But I'm so glad that people like Jenna are making good memories now and with their own children. And that's wonderful. And I guess they probably appreciate it more than sometimes we do, because we kind of take it for granted because that's what we grew up with. Right. But that made me sad. That made me sad that she had to use Dallas's memories to and wish that they were hers. Sandy says, same here. Yeah. Made me sad. All right, 295. Moving on to 301. 301. What did I mark here? Oh, she's talking about the Celebrity Center and how things are a little different there than they are in most Scientology orgs or missions or wherever, right? In many ways, she says, the Celebrity Center was the perfect stage for the act that Scientology put on for the celebrities. The accommodations were gorgeous, and beautiful grounds made the experience enjoyable. Everything was tightly controlled and orchestrated. And if the celebrities themselves took things at face value, they'd simply see the act and never witness what went on behind the curtain. And a little bit further down, this act of the Celebrity Center was crucial to how the church reached out to celebrities and encouraged them to join. So, the Scientology and the Celebrity Center has always been fascinating for me because it is different. Celebrities get all kinds of perks. Doesn't matter where they are on the bridge, doesn't matter if they're on course or not on course. They are treated so differently because they are celebrities. And if you have that celebrity name attached, that's going to get you more people, right? Rika says, I grew up in a different cult and relate to a lot of this. I agree for the childhood I did not have. No more kids in cults. I agree with you. No more kids in cults. No more kids being forced. And I grew up in a church. I grew up a Christian. And when I say a Christian, I'm not talking fundamentalist Christian necessarily. It's actually Episcopalian/Anglican, where one of our mottos is you don't have to check your brain at the door. I love that. But you're never, ever forced. In most real Christian churches, you're not forced to do anything. You may be strongly encouraged sometimes, and depending on your parents, maybe even a little worse, but you're not forced to do what these children did. Enrique, I feel so sorry for you. I feel so bad for you that you grew up in that. I hope you have found some peace and some light in your life now, and that you are making good memories now. And I hope this may be one of those getting together with us. I hope that maybe this is a good memory for you. But I feel sad for your child, and I grieve that with you. I stand by you. Sorry, I didn't mean to get emotional. But yeah, the Celebrity Center is just so crazy to me because they're using those celebrities to bring people in. And it says, I do not believe that the celebrities like Tom Cruise don't realize all the horrible things that happen. They choose not to believe or think about it. I think you're right. And I think especially at Tom Cruise's level, I do think maybe people like Laura Prepon, who's no longer in it, and some of the other people who just not hardcore, but they just kind of got roped into it. I don't know that they knew about all the stuff. Tom Cruise definitely does, because his own households are staffed with Sea Org members. Free labor for him. Don't even started on that. But no, I think you're right. A lot of them choose not to see it and put blinders on maybe, but I think in the beginning they probably don't know. And it makes me wonder how many of them get into it and then realize it, but they get so far into it and they've invested so much they can't back out, just like a everyday non-celebrity Scientologist. Rika says, I appreciate that. I'm good. I have healed, and that's why I protest, so I can be the voice I needed as a child. Yes, you go. That is awesome. I didn't know that you openly protest. That's excellent. I wish I could. The closest thing for me to protest is Clearwater, which is Flag, which Aaron makes it clear. It's really not a great place to protest because it's a whole different animal there. There's a mission in Ocala, which is an hour away from me, but it's a tiny little mission funded by John Travolta because he lives in Ocala. There's never anybody there. I think there's 2 staff members or something. So again, Sandy says, I think, how can they not know with the internet? And I think now with the internet, I think that's why you're seeing less and less celebrities. But I think in the old days, they didn't have that. I mean, even Tom Cruise would have been brought in before you really had the internet. We're old. I'm not that far off the mark from Tom Cruise's age. So I remember a time when there was no internet. And I think that a lot of them were brought in before that. But I think you're right. With the internet today, it makes it a lot harder. A lot harder. And I think, Aaron did a growing up in Scientology, did a video today on that Scientology is basically crumbling, and can Tom Cruise save it? But I think that's large part of why it's crumbling. The internet is killing it. Thank you. The internet is killing it. All right, I'm going to move on because we've got so much to cover. What page am I on? 301, 301. All right, moving to 303. Okay. Okay, so this is Jenna. She's talking about, hang on. Dallas has just proposed to her. So Dallas has just proposed. And at the very end of this, she's like, finally, I was going to be in a family of my own. And I wrote, C organization, they don't only marry to have sex. Many of them might be marrying to have a family, because many have had their families ripped from them. And I know a lot of it is because they're, teenagers, older teens, a lot of the time, young adults who are wanting to have sex. And so they can't have sex in the Sea Org unless they're married. I'm sure that's a big part of it. But that sentence there, I was going to have a family of my own, shows me that Jenna wasn't just looking for sex. She was looking for that family unit that she did not feel she had with her own actual family because of the situation and because of the Church of Scientology. So sad. But that just, that was a thought that came to my mind, is they're not just looking to have sex. I think they're also looking to belong and have a family, because they don't have one, unfortunately. All right, I'm going to move to 305. Please feel free to comment on any of that. You can comment anytime, guys, anytime you want. All right. So I'm on 305. So I think they are engaged at this point, but they're not married. And she's talking about being given the day off for Christmas, and that Dallas had gone to see his family. She said, I did get some press. She went out to dinner and movie with some of the other people in the Sea Org. And she said, I did get some presents in the mail from my parents, a stuffed animal, a watch, and some books, which I loved. I was not aware that as a goodwill gesture, my uncle had allowed them to communicate with me without restriction. I think he was just trying to keep them calm and happy so that the church didn't suffer legal ramifications if they decided to sue. However, this was still the only time that I had heard from them since our last meeting. So I thought that was interesting. Uncle Dave had said, I'm not going to restrict your communication. You can communicate with Jenna all you want, but they really didn't until Christmas. So again, I have these mixed feelings about her parents, because on the one hand, I think they genuinely want her out and they want to be a family and all that. But on the other hand, they're not communicating when they were given permission. So I don't know, were they afraid to do it because they were afraid they say something wrong and get Jenna in trouble? Because I think I might feel that way, but I'm just not sure what to feel about that whole thing. So that just struck me, because the parents could have been communicating and they weren't. And that says, I have mixed feelings too. I mean, I try to put myself in their shoes, and I know that if I get on the phone with Jenna as her mother, I might say the wrong thing inadvertently and cause a whole thing, and then Jenna gets in trouble because of something I said. And I wouldn't want my child to have to do, manual labor, make amends, whatever they would want to put in. Certainly not the RPF, Lord, not the RPF. But, I just have mixed feelings about all of that. All right, so I'm going to move on. 307. We have so much ground to cover, and we've already been going for 43 minutes. I'm trying not to keep you guys too terribly long. All right, top of page 307. What did I write? Oh, paranoia, I wrote in the column. It was a gross misapplication of the rollback, which was certainly not intended to decide if marrying me was an enemy line or if Dallas's intentions were sincere. But since the church was paranoid, the rollback was trying to see if Dallas had been told by someone to marry me to get information about my family or something along those lines. He would never have been put through this had my name not been Miscavige. Is that not crazy? I just thought that was crazy, that they are so paranoid that they thought that Dallas was being told by somebody else to marry Jenna to somehow get secrets on the Miscavige family. David Miscavige is paranoid, completely paranoid. Let's see. We have some things here. Annette says, but wondered if they were afraid of getting her in trouble or push her too hard as she shuts them down. Exactly. I think that might have played into that. I think it might have. Sandy says, I'm sure even after getting out, they probably had that Scientology parent mindset. I'm sure they did. They were brainwashed too. And I don't think they were like, middle-aged when they got into Scientology. They were young as well. So, Annette says, my daughter was involved with an abuser and I had to walk a very careful line not to alienate her so I could help when she needed. Yep, I get that. I had that situation too with my oldest stepdaughter. She's thankfully almost divorced from her abuser, but I had to walk a fine line because I knew pretty soon after they got married that he was not who he was pretending to be. Didn't get to be around him much before they were married, but then I was more afterwards, and I knew, but I couldn't say anything either. I just had to be there for her when the time came. And interestingly, my two stepdaughters see me more as mom than their own mom. Unfortunately, she's an alcoholic. So I'm not their mom, but I'm kind of the mom they come to for stuff. But yeah, I'm with you on that, Annette. Same thing. You have to walk that line. And I'm sure her parents were doing the same thing. I'm sure they were walking that line. Try not to push her too hard. Try not to get her in trouble with her own abusers. And here we are. It just floors me. We're talking about a church, and yet we're saying they're abusers, her abusers. All right, going to page 308 to 309. I'm going to read this little paragraph that spans these 2 pages, and then I want to tell you what I wrote up in the margin. I knew that out 2D was bad. And if you guys remember, out 2D means having sexual relations when you're not married. Was bad if you were engaging in adultery or were promiscuous. But in our case, we were in a committed relationship and we had been dating for months. We were the ones trying to follow the rules and get married while they were simply coming up with excuses about why we couldn't move forward. We wanted to do the right thing, and they'd made that impossible. We were all too aware that following their rules put happiness out of reach, so we did what we wanted and what we felt was right for us. To hell with the consequences. So they're being told you can't have sex until you get married, but then they're making it impossible for them to get married. And I wrote at the top of the page, control, in big letters, underline. It's all about control. It feels to me like that was strictly about control. How much can we control these people and make them do what we want them to do? Even if it's not what we want them to do, make them not do what they want to do. Again, it's all about control, which again is cult behavior. It's all cult things, right? But yeah, that made me angry for her. And I know she's getting angrier and angrier through all this. All right, we're going to move to 310. Again, please say anything you want to say, comment. Okay, I'm going to read this, and I'm going to tell you what I wrote in the column here. So we're on page 310, so the very next page. I was terrified and furious all at once. Sea Org rules and policies demanded that I sit there quietly and do whatever I was told at times this grave, but I simply couldn't do it. Where the F is he? I'm not going to say the F word because I don't know who I might offend. Where the F is he? I demanded of Mr. H. And she's talking about Dallas because he's been taken from her. She was shocked and said she didn't know. BS, I yelled, not sparing words. I stormed out of her office and started opening doors up and down the hall trying to find him. And I wrote in the column, yay, Jenna. I thought she was so badass for doing that. For basically just saying, I'm done. I'm done with this. You've taken the one person away from me I still have, that we're trying to get married. You're not going to let us get married. And now you separated us because he confessed to going out 2D, right? So now you've got them separated and you're doing all these sex checks on them and all this. And she can't find her man. And she goes after him. Yay, Jenna. I got so excited. I didn't realize she had done that specific thing. So I got really happy about that. Anybody else have comments? All right, so that's 310. I'm going to move on to 312. End of chapter 26. She's talking. So she's out on the road. She's walking on the road. She's actually up at Mulholland. I think Marty had taken her up there at this point, but then he left her because she got out of the car. She was angry. He was angry. So she sees another couple up there, a pair of lovers, and says, the girl in the pair, obviously feeling bad for me, handed me her phone. I thanked her, looked at it, then looked back at her, suddenly realizing I had absolutely nobody to call. And I got angry again when I read that. These people have taken everybody in Jenna's life away. Her parents have been taken away. She has no contact with her brothers because there are other places in the Sea Org. You can't have contact with them, right? You have to do your own thing. She finally has somebody in her life, and now they've taken him away too for having sex. because they won't let them get married. I got really, really angry at that one. She had absolutely nobody to call. Sad and angry. My sadness and my anger tend to go along hand in hand a lot. That's may just be me. Again, your mileage may vary. No comments on all of that. If you're furiously typing, I'll see the comment come up and I will back up and we'll read it. Oh, here we go. Annette says, this was the worst for me so far. I just wanted to cry and find her and hug her. I know. Same. And it doesn't necessarily get a lot better. I mean, eventually it does, but this is a really hard part to read, this whole section of the book. It's just so hard. All right, so I'm going to go to 315. Got a couple of things on here. This, I think, is one of the turning points for Jenna. She says, however, for reasons, okay, let's back up a little bit. They seem committed to making me repent for my out 2D and for my behavior and to admit I was wrong for having sex with her fiance. It would have been easier for me if I thought I was wrong. However, for reasons that I couldn't describe that were out of my control and beyond my understanding, I couldn't submit in the way in which they asked of me and in which I had in the past. This is a turning point. She's like, I'm not doing it. I'm not submitting to this anymore. I really think this is we see Jenna progressing over time with getting a little more bold in her resistance to them and their practices. And I really liked it when I saw these kinds of what I call positive behaviors from Jenna. Pause for a sip. And I'm so sorry. This is going to go a little over long. I'm trying to go as fast as I can, but I also want to keep you guys involved. So we're going to keep going. And then a little bit further down, whereas earlier I had resented the questions, yet answered them, suddenly cooperating in any way became a struggle. So her brain was already telling her spirit was telling her not to cooperate with these people. I found that a very, very good sign. Next page over, page 316. I love this. She's demanding to know where Dallas is again. And she says, I'm going to find him. And you know what else? I'm never going to sit down for another session so somebody can get off on my sex stories. I'm through with that. And she has a point there. Rika says, you're doing great. Thank you. I'm just trying to get through this because there's so much in this section of the book. But Jenna has a point here. What did she say? I'm never going to sit down for another session so somebody can get off on my sex stories. I'm through with that. And I think that happens a lot in Scientology. I think this whole thing when they get you to confess about sex and they want to know all the details. I mean, technically, according to Scientology practice, you're supposed to do that. But I think people are just getting off on it. I think the sexual current and undertone of Scientology, whereas on the face of it, they're very puritanical and you can't have sex till you're married and all of this stuff. Otherwise you're out 2D. I think that underneath that, as is often the case when somebody is very, very strong about something like that in a puritanical way, I think there's this whole undercurrent of sex perversion going on in Scientology under the surface. I don't know that it's official or sanctioned anywhere, but I think it's there. I think people get in positions where they can hear these stories. They become an auditor so they can hear these stories. They become somebody in OSA so they can do the sex checks and hear these stories. It's really kind of gross, in my opinion. Okay, so I'm going to move on. If you have comments, please make them. Page 319. At the top of the page, finally, I grew so desperate and depressed that I went back to Mr. H for help. It didn't take long for our conversation to escalate into a screaming argument that ended up with her slamming the door in my face. Undeterred, I broke it down a second time. So if you might remember earlier, she's already broken down the door on this woman's office one time, and now she broke it down again. Even though it had just been fixed, she broke it for the second time. So, and I literally wrote, ha ha, an exclamation point, because I thought that was funny that she broke it again. Let's see. Annette says, I think all this shows that Hubbard himself was a pervert, and that is why things were written. And it lets like people do the same. Yes, I think you're right. I think that L. Ron Hubbard probably was a pervert. He was a weird, weird dude. If you ever watched any of his, can't say videos, I guess they're on video now, but they were films from back in the day where he's doing lectures and stuff. He's a weird, weird dude. Sandy says, I've been reading overts and withholds from the Lisa McPherson case. It's astounding what is revealed. I know. These people have to tell all this stuff, and it just floors me. Like, there are things I might say to a therapist along those lines if I felt like it was necessary for the healing I needed to go through. But I know that therapist has to keep it secret. They have to keep it with themselves unless there's a threat to my life, I think. But I know they're not going to like go talk about me with somebody else. And in Scientology, these auditors, these sect checkers, they go talk to other people at their level about what they just learned about somebody. So, here's the thing, the whole Tom Cruise thing, I think Tom Cruise does enjoy the power. I think he enjoys having control over people and being treated like a god. I think he enjoys all of that. But I also think they have stuff on him from his own auditing. And I think that he knows they have that stuff. And I think he's not going to leave the church because of that. Sandy says they use these secrets as weapons. They do. They absolutely do. And that's where I think even Tom Cruise might have some of that being held over his head as well. So anyway, I thought it was funny. Jenna broke down the door. That made me laugh. All right. So where are we? We're on 319, 320. Next page. I drew a shocked face in the corner. Oh, this is where she's standing on the ledge because she's had it. She's had enough at this point. Annette says, I agree with the power trip. Yeah. So Jenna's standing on the ledge 5 stories up and looking at cars speeding by. She says, I couldn't believe it had come to this. It was starting to get dark. The wind tugged at the hairs of my sweater, the street lights below merging into a blur. So she actually she said, I had no control over anything, but the prospect of taking my own life was a way to change that. How frightening and sad is it that the prospect of taking your own life is the only way you think you can get some kind of control? This is where I think in a lot of ways the church goes too far. They just go too far. So I just had this big, and she talks about, we're just talking about Lisa McPherson. She talks about that here. They didn't need another PR flap. They would likely do anything to prevent it, especially after Lisa McPherson. This was my last-ditch effort to regain what they had taken from me, to use the only leverage I felt that I had left, the fear of bad PR and my own life. That's the only thing she felt like she could control. Sad. Next page, 321. She's talking about Dallas, and they're talking about they've been separate this whole time, and he can't tell her what he's been doing or who's been talking to him, who he's been talking to, which we find out later. It's exactly who and what Jenna suspected. But she says, he could say he wanted to be with me, but when he'd been forced to choose between me and the church, between my safety and obeying orders, we both knew that he had chosen the church. I had finally found him, but somehow he was already lost. So yeah, Dallas, I'm kind of not surprised that she and Dallas didn't stay together, even though they got out together. Because there's some issues there, but that were already a little bit of red flaggy there. Okay, but then I also drew a really big frowny face. Thinking back to that night, it's difficult to say whether I was testing him, them, or myself. I still don't know if I was really going to jump each time I took up my 5-story perch. But what I do know was that in that moment, as I stood outside the window, I experienced the pain of every loss I had faced at the hands of the church over and over again. My parents, my brother, my friends. If the church was going to take Dallas too, then maybe jumping out the window wasn't such a bad idea. Again, another symptom of the church of Scientology taking things too far. They just push things too far. And I don't understand. So like, what do we know the definition of insanity is? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Lisa McPherson, Jenna was willing to, and we know there are other suicides, I hate to use that word, other S's, other unalivings that happened under Scientology's watch. And I can't think of her name, but the woman in Clearwater that it just happened to not that long ago. And yet this church continues to do the same things over and over, expecting that things are going to be different. We are going to abolish Scientology, Rika. From your pen, your fingers, to God's or the universe's ears. I want so badly to take this cult down. I just don't have a foothold to do that. This is my way of doing it, is having a book club and exploring this. So I'm going to move on to 322. This is where Dallas said where she's kind of recognizing that Dallas is going to be declared a suppressive person and be separated from his family if he follows her. And she knows that. So she said, I wanted to feel relief knowing that Dallas did think my life was important enough to break at least one rule. I could see that he was really hurt, that he had been in a horrible bind and didn't know what to do. And for that, I felt as though I was the worst person in the world, which I'd always been told that I was. Still, I struggled to get past my own ordeal. I had risked everything out of love for him and fear of being separated, but as far as I could tell, he hadn't felt the same way. He had a lot more to lose than just me. So they're just kind of getting into Dallas's head a little bit there, because I have some issues with his what seems to be kind of weakness. But again, he had his whole family to lose. She points that out. So, she was a very understanding. Jenna is a very warm and kind and understanding person. And how she is that raised in Scientology this way is just floors me, because it just floors me. It's so, I don't understand. Like, even then she's giving him credit. So, Rika says, thank you for this. I have dyslexia, so reading isn't my thing. You are helping. Aw, thank you. I very much appreciate that. I hope so. I hope this is my little way of doing it. So, all right, I'm going to move to page 326. We're getting there, people. We're getting there. 326. Near the bottom of the page, as I looked back on what I had been through, one thing was clear to me. The only way that people in the church would stop taking advantage of me was for me to say no to them, even if it pushed them to the edge. She starts saying no. Excuse me. And that's not something that they're used to. She starts saying no. I just wanted to make that point, that she starts saying no. She realized the way to do this is to start saying no. Moving to page 328. Despite how rebellious I was being, I still wasn't sent to the RPF. Instead, I was honing my ability to say no. The realization I'd had at the Big Bear meant that they could only control me if I were willing to accept their treatment. So this was after they went to Big Bear and they got to stay in a cabin for a while and just kind of be there on retreat. Jenna is tiny and mighty. She is fierce. She, to me, is the definition of fierce. Because she's still soft and womanly and kind and all those things, but she is fierce when it comes to certain things. And I love that about her. But again, I just marked this part on page 328 because, again, she's talking about saying no and refining that skill. Now, I knew I was marking too many pages, so I read these, but I didn't mark anything for a while. I'm moving way over to 336. And I put some question marks here. Let me see if I can, so this is where they get sent on the mission to Australia, which was kind of weird. She was saying that the orders seemed to be like orders for somebody else that had just kind of been rewritten. It even said at the top, find a building in Kentucky, and they were going to Australia. So it was almost like they just took somebody else's orders and sort of tried to fill in the blanks, but they missed one. And she says the whole thing was extremely peculiar. Why this mission and why us? It seemed as though it was some sort of plan to take us off lines or out of sight. Neither of us had any idea what was behind this, but we didn't ask too many questions. We were just grateful to be going to Australia together. So this is exactly what Scientology was doing. They were trying to get them away from all the people they knew, because they didn't want anybody else to see Jenna's rebellion, for one thing. I think that was a big part of it. Annette says, reading this reminded me of what my bonus dad used to tell me. I am 4'11". Dynamite comes in small packages. It does indeed. It does indeed. All right, so I'm going to move to page 339. Oh, I just thought it was really interesting. She makes a note of Operation Clambake on this page, and that's the website that a lot of former Scientologists were at, and even some under the radars, I think, that were on the internet at this time, and like talking about Scientology in a negative way, etc. But Dallas brings her attention to it. Dallas has gotten there in Australia. They have a little bit more freedom. He's on the internet and he finds Operation Clambake. I thought that was interesting that he found it and brought it to Jenna's attention, not the other way around. So I thought that was really cool. All right, 339, 342, star. Okay. So this is when they're hanging out with some of their friends in Australia who have children. All this time with Jeanette and Eden, this was the mother and daughter, got me thinking in a way which I never had before about what it would be like to have a family. Dallas was also great with her. He loved to pick her up and twirl her around until she burst out giggling. He adored children and always remarked about how cute and special they were. But knowing kids are not allowed for Sea Org members, the thought of being a mother hadn't really occurred to me. Yet for the first time ever, I found myself wondering if I was missing out. And I wrote, the walls continue to crumble. So all these things have been happening in her life that Scientology has forced on her. And now she's getting a taste of what it's like to be a mom. And that maternal instinct is kicking in. So a little bit more of the wall comes crumbling down. Moving to 343, I put a sad face. So her grandmother died. The grandmother that she loved in Clearwater that she had to leave behind when they took her back out to LA. So it says they tried to get Scientology to book a flight back to the States for her funeral, but they wouldn't get us home in time. My parents, however, were permitted to go to Florida to be at her service. I was devastated that I never got to say goodbye to my grandmother. Although she ends this with a little bit positive. I sometimes talked to her when nobody was around just to say goodbye, but I don't think she heard me. So, I mean, if you remember, she didn't get to say goodbye to her grandmother leaving Clearwater to go to LA, and now they've been carted off to Australia. And she never got to say goodbye to her grandmother. That's just another sad, sad thing that makes me sad and angry on her behalf. All right, so I'm going to move on to 343. Did I not do that one? Oh, I just did that one. Sorry. 346. Okay, I'm going to read this. I'm going to tell you what I wrote in the margin. Some people did manage to leave early, like a 70-year-old woman with emphysema who left at 3 a.m. This is when they were being to work almost really around the clock. This is back in LA. They're back in LA. However, such people were dealt with harshly at the next day's muster. They were called to the front of the group and reprimanded, told that they were despicable and that their behavior was disgusting. They were put on a punishment of scrubbing a dumpster inside and out for an hour. For the next week, we were warned that if any of us walked one step out of line, the whole group would be put on boot camp cleaning dumpsters. So not only are they being forced to work ungodly amounts of hours, but if they step out of line just a little bit, if they can't do it, if they are sick, if they're old, if they're weak, whatever, and they can't do it, they get punished even more. I wrote in the margin abuse. I mean, that is just clear out abuse of people. It's abuse of anybody that's underaged. And if it's somebody who's an elderly person over a certain age, depending on the state, that's elder abuse, like the 70-year-old woman with emphysema, that would be elder abuse. That's another one I don't get. I don't get how states have not stepped in with children, and I don't get how state governments haven't stepped in when it comes to these elderly people who have been in Scientology all their lives and are being treated the way they're being treated. Rosemary's story alone, Rosemary Brown, whatever her real last name is now, but Mike Brown's mother, her story alone should be enough to start an investigation. And of all places in California, that surprises me that nobody has stepped forward to do that. But again, Scientology has probably safe pointed all these people and got them in their back pocket. Let's see. What is Sandy? It's horrific, Sandy says. And it is. It is absolutely horrific. It is. Down to the bottom, to some extent, let's see. Hang on again. In fact, the welfare of the Sea Org members appear to be the least important thing. To some extent, I'd noticed this before, but Australia helped me to see just how crucial this search for money had become to our duties in the Sea Org. So she's just noticing now that, having that freedom in Australia and what they experience in Australia is helping her to see again a little bit more of the onions being peeled back so she can really see what's going on. Annette says, this is what confuses me the most too. Why isn't government agencies stepping forward? I think in local areas and maybe even on a statewide level in some places, I think the agencies that would be applicable to this are in the pocket. They've been safe pointed by Scientology. When it comes to the federal government, I honestly don't know why. The FBI should be involved. The FBI should be involved with this because people are trafficked not over just state lines, but from other countries. And they are slave labor. They are virtually slave labor. And I don't know if they're still doing it, but it used to be a common practice to hold their passports. They couldn't even try to leave because they didn't have their passport. Now, I had heard that had maybe been changed. I don't know, but why are people staying so much then? Why aren't they leaving if they can get their passports? Because they're probably being held against their will. And they're probably still actually holding their passports. Just because they say they aren't doesn't mean they aren't. And anyway, but you're right, Annette. I don't get it either. I think on the federal level, FBI should definitely be involved. Local levels, people should be ashamed of themselves if they've been safe pointed by Scientology and they're that corrupt. They really should just be ashamed of themselves. All right, I'm going to move on because I could do this all day, but we don't have all day. I'm going to move to 348. She's talking about the cell phone that she had and that they were trying to take it away from her and she refused to. And she said, maybe the real purpose for taking away our phone was to cut us off from the outside world, to control what information we were exposed to. And we all know that that's absolutely the case. That was absolutely the case. I had something before that too. Hang on. Okay. So they gave on the page before, they gave multiple reasons why the cell phone for giving up the cell phone, the different things. Well, we need to do it for this reason. And no, I'm not going to do it. Okay, then we need to do it for this reason. No, I'm not going to do that. Okay, we're going to do it for this reason. Nope, I'm not going to do that. And then she says, all of their excuses were perfect examples of punishment and deprivation for their own sake. They didn't care about the phone itself. And truthfully, that by that point, neither did I. I wasn't fighting about a phone. I was fighting about the principle of it. They were trying to take something that belonged to Dallas and me. It was our property, yet they felt entitled to take it. What made it even more hypocritical was that, by definition, one of the main characteristics of a suppressive person was that they had no regard for personal property. So many contradictions in Scientology between policy as written by LRH and how things are actually done, especially in the David Miscavige era. So much has changed under his era. So I thought that was an interesting thing. And then on the next page, 349, she's talking about how she doesn't really believe in anything in Scientology at this point, except for one thing. Auditing was the embodiment of the only thing in which I still believed. I thought that was really interesting, that it came down to the auditing was the one thing she believed. And probably because that's a machine and not a person, and people can't be trusted, right? Okay. Any comments? Throw them in there. Throw them in there. All right. I'm going to move to page 351. We're getting there. So this is after she was being held and she was being audited, and she lit to try to get to the bottom of whatever was going on, supposedly. And she physically tries to leave. She's blocked. She physically tries. She pushes people. She smashed the cans. She squashed them with her foot. She threw her folder on the table. I mean, there's a physical altercation that happens here. And I think this might be where she now in more modern times has admitted to that's when she bit somebody, but she doesn't say she bit him in the book. But I think this is that time when she actually bit somebody, which gave her the nickname Gencula. So anyway, she says, the next day I woke up bruised, exhausted, and very on edge. I was told that as a result of my behavior, I would not be allowed to audit. She was going to be an auditor. She's not going to be allowed to do that. Again, Scientology taking things too far. I was assigned lower conditions. I was told that I had disturbed the sessions of other people in neighboring auditing rooms while trying to get out of my room. This was a suppressive act. I insisted that denying my right to audit was not per policy, but they didn't seem to care. I wrote off policy and punishment in the margin. Not that I care about policy, but if they're going to care about policy, they should be applying the policy, and they're not. And then down the way here, towards the bottom, she says, because she was being told she could not audit, she said, at that moment, I decided I was done with the Sea Org. I'd finally gotten to be an auditor, only to realize that the rules were not any better for that than they were anywhere else. All at once, everything that had been building for several years, it all just snapped. I wanted to be gone. And I wrote snap in the margin before I read that sentence, that it all just snapped. This was her final breaking point. It had been building up, and she is finally at the true breaking point. And I was cheering through that whole section. Going to move to page 355. Please comment if you have anything to say, if you have any other comments to make. It can't all be just me. So I'm reading the top of page 355 is chapter 31. The chapter is called Gone. And I spent several days in isolation in my room, waiting for someone in the Office of Special Affairs to give me the necessary materials and sessions to route out properly. So she purposely put herself in her room and isolated herself because she was not having it with these people. And I just put a woman after my own heart. She is being stubborn and saying, I'm going to sit here till you do what I need you to do and want you to do, because I need out. I want out. I appreciate stubbornness, because I'm pretty stubborn if you ask my family. I'm going to move to page 357. And again, I've written policy, not policy. There's a whole bunch going on this page. So there's a routing form. Linda shows her the steps on the routing form. The first one is she had to receive a security check, which of course gave her chills. She didn't want to do a security check. She doesn't like them. I don't know anybody in Scientology that has left it that likes security checks. But it is policy. That's part of the policy. And if you refuse to have the confessional, you'll be declared a suppressive person. So she knows she has to do that. But next, it called for her to sign a bond. She explained it was a document I would be required to sign, swearing I would never speak out against the church. If I ever violated this bond, I would have to pay $10,000 for each violation. She said if I didn't sign it, I would be declared an SP. That pissed me off. LRH had never written a policy like this, and I told her as much. So their whole routing out, the security check part is policy, according to LRH. But there was nothing in there about a bond and being charged to speak out against the church. They're so contradictory, and there's I don't know. There's just so much corruption within the Church of Scientology. So she says, I told her I would do my confessional, which I've been waiting to receive for several weeks now, but I would not sign anything. And then the person says, you're going to be a suppressive person. She drops a checklist on the bed and directed me to read it myself. You mean this? Jenna said mockingly as she picked it up, shredded it into 100 pieces, and then she told her to get out of her room. And I wrote, yes, in big letters with exclamation points. I was so glad Jenna was finally truly standing up to these people. So, okay, I know we're going way over, guys. I know we are. I'm trying to get through this. 359. I wrote in my margin, destroying families. This is where Dallas and Jenna are having a conversation about leaving. Finally, at 4 a.m, our discussion came to an end. The decision had been made. I was going to leave, and he was going to stay. Again, Scientology destroying families. Just seems to happen all the freaking time in Scientology. 361. Okay, I'm right here. Hang on. I have to read this. So I totally lost it when she tried to get, because this is, they're at the airport now, and this is with this Linda person. I totally lost it when she tried to convince Dallas to stick me in a cab and not take me to the airport himself. They're getting ready to go to the airport. I was his wife, for God's sake. This was going to be the last time we would ever see each other, yet she was so vindictive she couldn't even let us have that. And I wrote in my margin, Linda, is she a bee that rhymes with witch, or just doing her job, doing what she was told? I'm not sure, but that struck me. 362. So she's had a conversation with her parents. She's decided, or she hasn't had the conversation yet, I don't think. I can't remember, but she's now decided. They're at the airport. Now she's thinking she can't leave. She says, I can't leave you. I don't want to be without you. I'll stay and try to fix things. But then she says, I really had no intention of surrendering to the church, but I wasn't going to tell Dallas that. I just needed the time it would take to convince him to leave with me. And I wrote yay in the margin there. And then all of a sudden he tells Linda she's going to come back. She's not going to leave. And she's like, well, she can't stay. And Dallas is like, what? And she says she can't stay. Dallas was in disbelief. The contradictions of the church were on full display, perhaps more clearly than ever before. He was able to see how the church said one thing and meant another. So I was really glad at this point that Dallas was seeing that. And then on the next page, says the only reason Dallas confesses to her that he'd been meeting with Linda and Mike Render. They've been telling him all kinds of bad things. And then said the only reason they didn't separate them was because Dallas had promised he wasn't going to tell her that he was talking to them. So Jenna says, my mouth dropped. I knew it. My father had warned me, and I knew myself what the church was capable of, but somehow I didn't understand how they thought they could get away with it. I guess I was just naive. I tried to contain my fury when Dallas told me that they had made him submit to a sec check and prevented him from coming to see me during lunch, and had made him come home late almost every night. They'd also locked him up in a boardroom where Mike Render had told him I hadn't been cooperating. I was no good. My parents were evil, and he should leave me. That just made me really angry. Again, destroying families. Again, Scientology doing its destroying families thing. All right, 365. I hope you guys are still there. If you're not, I'm talking to myself, and that's okay. 365. As it became clear to them that we were not going to accept their terms and were a united front, they gave an ultimatum: either separate or leave the Sea Org. Dallas told them it was because of them that we were going to be leaving. With that, we said we were going back to our room to get our stuff, but they told us we were no longer allowed on the base. Well, if you leave, you're blowing, the security officer said. With this, Dallas flipped a lid. How can we be blowing? He said in disbelief. If you're telling us we can't stay here, how can we be blowing? So I said, once again, Church of Scientology goes too far. Sandy says, I'm still here. Yay. Thank you, Sandy. So yeah, again, Scientology goes too far. They're saying you can't stay, but if you leave, you're blowing. Which is it? You can't have both. It can't be both things at the same time. 366. So the next morning, they set off for Dallas's parents' house in San Diego, and I wrote finally out, and I was super excited that they were finally out. I mean, I know how the story ends, but it just made me excited to read it, that they were finally out. All right, so I'm going to move on to 369. So she was talking about people that she was working with out in the real world. And she said, through their eyes, I slowly learned how weird my upbringing had been. Sandy says, damned if you do and damned if you don't. Exactly. That's exactly what Scientology was doing here. But anyway, I thought this was interesting that she finally gets out in the real world for some length of time, and she realizes slowly how weird her upbringing was. And I can't imagine how that must feel when you start realizing that things are so different out in the real world, not inside the bubble. And then on page 370, I underlined, so I told them I was going to be, they drove up to Pac Base in LA one morning. They're talking about going back and routing out properly, I think. And then she says, she knew they would be recording it. So she says, so I told them that I was going to be recording it as well and put my tape player on the table. I can just see her doing that. I'm going to be recording it as well. Click, and putting it on the table. I drew a heart in my margin for that. Jenna's so badass. And then on the next page, 371, she says, being out allowed us to gain more of an outsider's perspective on the church. It didn't come to us all at once in the form of one big piece of information from one source. More frequently, we learn little things here and there, but over time, they added up. So, and we were kind of talking about that earlier, that things kind of built up, and then being in the real world, slowly she's starting to realize how different life is out in the real world. Moving to 372, what struck me the most was not the story itself, but the fact that if I had heard this at the peak of my faith, I probably would have believed it. And this is talking about level OT3 on the, as Natalie would say, the bridge to total freedom. So she's talking about OT3 and what it's all about, Xenu and that whole thing. And she said that at the peak of her belief, she probably would have believed it. And Aaron even says that. Aaron Smith-Levin says that he might have believed it at the time when he was so hardcore as a believer. On the next page, Dallas started reading The Barefaced Messiah, The True Story of L. Ron Hubbard. And I did write on here, is that a book we might want to do? I've never read The Barefaced Messiah, and I think it might be. It's kind of one of the originals, so it might be a good one for us to do. We'll talk about our next book at the end. I've got it right here. But I just thought that's something to consider. You guys can give me your opinions, your thoughts in the chat. If you're seeing this on the replay, please feel free to put it in the comments if you think we should do Barefaced Messiah by Russell Miller, if you think that might be a good book to do for the book club. Moving to the next page, 374. In my opinion, the Big Brother concept of internal policing made people more paranoid than productive and alienated people from each other. So she was talking about knowledge reports and how they do them in Scientology, but because they were working for Dallas's parents and they had to do things in a Scientology way, and they actually wrote knowledge reports at the jewelry business, that she said this Big Brother thing made people more paranoid than productive, and she's correct. Sandy says, I've heard Barefaced Messiah is excellent. I have too. So I think after we do the Bad Cadet, we might do that one next. So, all right, moving on to page 375. I'm going to start on the other page. On MySpace, this is way back when MySpace was a thing. I was being pressured to unfriend SPs like Mark and Claire Headley and Teddy Blackman. Claire had been a good friend in the church, and I wanted to stay in touch with her. So she's talking about people who were out like Mark and Claire. And I was just thinking how divided that has come now. And I've just wrote in my margin, sad how things have changed since then, because they were all kind of support for each other. But unfortunately, I guess some of them are still so indoctrinated by the cult mindset that they're still operating that way in a lot of ways. So things have really changed. And then just below that, I wrote, we got our chance to read people's stories and tell our own. They're talking about the online ex-Scientology community. They were eerily similar. We had all gone through hell. I was particularly surprised to hear that many of them had experienced recurring nightmares just as I did. And I wrote in the margin, trauma. That is such a sign of trauma when you have a recurring nightmare about the situation. I've had a couple that through therapy and dealing with it, I think have kind of healed through that, but that is such a sign of trauma. Rika, you can probably speak to that too. But to me, that's the first thing I thought when I read that all these people who had been in Scientology and suffered through the abuses are now out, but they're all having these recurring nightmares. Annette says, yes, trauma. Yep. So moving on to 376, top of the page. Actually, I'm going to start on the previous page. In a 15-page rebuttal, it called the book, and it's talking about Tom Cruise, an unauthorized biography. In a 15-page rebuttal, it called the book, quote, a bigoted, defamatory assault replete with lies, and went on to list each and every allegation provided a response. Their outright denial of a family disconnection policy elicited outrage in me. Does Scientology encourage their members not to speak to their family if they don't know the religion? The release asked. This is not only false, it is the opposite of what the church believes and practices, which is a total lie. We know that they have a policy of disconnection. We know that. A total out and out lie. And then Jenna, down the page near the bottom, Jenna's writing something here. She says, if Scientology can't keep his family together, meaning David Miscavige, then why on earth should anyone believe that the church helps bring families together? Very telling there, isn't it? And the last line of this chapter, this wasn't about a few isolated incidents as the church liked to make it seem. This was systemic and it was widespread and the world needed to be told. So I think we're getting some of that with the protesters. We're almost done, guys. We are almost done. Let's see. We are on page 379, chapter 33, almost there. And this is called Sharing the Truth. So she's talking at the top here about Anonymous and the protests from Anonymous and their work. Their message became not just about internet censorship, but also about standing up to the church and bringing awareness to its violations of human rights. Next paragraph, I'm going to read the whole thing because it's important. I simply cannot express how much this meant to me. Up until then, it felt as though I and a few others had been fighting the church with our backs to the wall. People were telling me I was crazy, wrong, and suppressive. To see a group of people rise up like this in defense of the many who had been wronged by the church was a huge testament to the kindness of the human race. Most of these people had no previous involvement with the church. Unlike the media, this group wasn't afraid of the church or what the church said or about being sued. Now it felt like there was a whole army in our corner, and I said even more so today. I think Anonymous was great when they did what they did, but it was kind of fleeting, and then it was done. To me, the current protest movement seems to be growing and growing and growing, and there's this core of people that are not going to stop until Scientology is taken down, and that's largely in part to the internet and to SPTV and people being able to see this stuff on YouTube. Sandy says, Jenna was such a groundbreaker. She was absolutely a groundbreaker. You know, she participated, as we learn in the book, with Anonymous. I didn't know that. I didn't know she participated in the Anonymous protests. I thought that was awesome. Going to move to page 381. We're getting so close. So after a while, Dallas and I agreed to meet Dallas's parents and the two OSA reps at a Denny's restaurant nearby because it was the only place open late. Started off with abusive comments from the two OSA reps about our behavior, our families, and our attitudes. One falsely called my mother a whore. The other said I was using my uncle's name to get my 15 minutes of fame. They were clearly living in their own world, and Dallas and I saw no point in arguing with these people who were so detached from reality, but Dallas's parents insisted that we stay and try to come down to some resolution. So we tried to oblige them. Finally, we got down to the real reason for the visit. The execs pleaded with me to pull the ABC Nightline deal and refused to do additional interviews. They tried to bargain with me. If I did, they said they would lift a declare on my Aunt Sarah and several of my friends, allowing them to speak to their families. So I started off with all that at the beginning of that section. I put bullying because they were being bullied. OSA was bullying them. And then I don't remember. I can't read my own writing right here. Didn't something. And then I put they started begging them. They pleaded with her to pull the Nightline thing. And they tried to bribe her with lifting the declare on her Aunt Sarah. I'm glad Jenna didn't do that and she went forward with it anyway. Yay, Jenna. So, and then the next page, on page 382, I just marked because they were being followed by someone as they were driving around Dallas. They figured out they were being followed. So typical of Scientology to have private investigators following people that are speaking out against them. And then on page 383, I'd stopped being surprised by this behavior, but at the same time, it was hard not to be startled by the apparent links they were willing to go to in order to disrupt our lives. Again, the whole fair gaming thing. They seemed to operate in their own small world where they could do what they wanted to whomever they wanted, and yet they had so little sense of what was going on beyond the borders of their own little world. So I just thought that was interesting that she was recognizing that. Moving to page 385, getting so close. So here I wrote, I'm going to read this. I'm going to tell you what I wrote. They even went so far as to say that the only reason Dallas had married me was that he wanted to take over my uncle's position in the church. That sounded so ridiculous to me. So I wrote paranoia, or is this another example of the Church of Scientology going too far? Is that Dave's paranoia? He thinks that Dallas is only marrying his niece because he wants to take over Scientology? How paranoid do you have to be? So I just found that really, really interesting. Any thoughts on that would be completely welcome. Last chapter of the book, One Life, chapter 34. Sandy says, that's laughable. It was. I actually literally did laugh out loud. And then I thought, gosh, how paranoid is that? Or is it just the Scientology going too far? Or is it both? I'm not sure. All right, last chapter. Here we go. First sentence of the chapter. The longer I was out, the more I came to understand that my life had been owned by the church. Another sad, sad commentary there. And then going to the next page, Uncle Dave was concerned that they would be. So this is why she was saying this is why her parents were sent to Mexico. And when they left, that Dave wanted them to go to Mexico. She said Uncle Dave was concerned they would be subpoenaed for deposition in the Lisa McPherson case if they were in the United States. It was only later that Mike learned why Uncle Dave had been so afraid, which was that Uncle David told my parents that he had supervised her auditing during the period before her death. And I know that's come out in more recent times, but Jenna was the first one to put it out there that Dave Miscavige himself was the person in charge of Lisa McPherson's auditing. And we know what happened to Lisa McPherson. He is culpable. He was not held accountable, but he is culpable for sure. Next page over, page 389. She was saying she was always wondering how much that David Miscavige, her Uncle Dave, knew what was going on with all the stuff with her parents going to Mexico and Mike and Marty trying to get her to leave with her parents and all that. She said it was telling that Uncle Dave was always pulling the strings, but never showing his face. The puppet master, right? And everybody else was just doing his bidding. And a little bit further down, from everything I learned about him, he thought he was the only one capable of doing anything right. And we know that Miscavige thinks that I have to fix it because none of you can do it. I'm the only person that can do it. Page 390. I wrote this down because this struck me here. She's talking about her Uncle Dave again. Remember early in the book, she talked about how she saw this human side. He just wanted to be a fun uncle and, spend time with his family. Now she says, it seemed more about making my life miserable and creating as many barriers as possible for us. Family meant nothing to him. Talking about David Miscavige. And I said, so different from earlier in her life and in her book. And then later, a little bit further down, what struck me once again was how he always had his decisions carried out by others. He insulated himself from his actions and the human toll that they took. He didn't have to confront the uncomfortable questions that his decisions raised about just how disconnecting people from their families served the greater good and what any of this had to do with Scientology. And I wrote dictator because David Miscavige is a dictator. She just described one right there. And then the next page, she's talking about them learning to live outside in the real world and how important it is as an individual, that nobody in this world was born to be the same as anyone else, and that turning people into robots, especially children, is a crime against nature itself. And we kind of talked about that in the first section of the book when they talked about the Chinese school and being robotic, and that was horrific for anybody, but especially children. And then moving to 392, she said, to me, the church is a dangerous organization whose beliefs allow it to commit crimes against humanity and violate basic human rights. It remains a mystery to me how in our current society this can go on unchecked. And we've talked about that. We don't know how it goes on unchecked either. It's particularly insidious because of its celebrity advocates and affiliated groups such as Narconon, Applied Scholastics, and the Citizens Commission on Human Rights. And I just wrote 100% in the margin because I agree with her 100%. Next page, Scientology has always been a game of power and control. L. Ron Hubbard was the ultimate con man, and it's hard to figure out how much of Scientology was an experiment in brainwashing and controlling people, and how much of it was truly intended to help people. That'd be interesting to hear from people. How much do you think it was just a con and an experiment on controlling people, or how much of it do you think LRH was actually wanting to help people? I don't know. I don't know what that answer is. I tend to think it was a con all along, that he was using it to make himself rich and powerful, in my opinion. So this next paragraph, I have such respect for Jenna. While I have plenty of reasons to loathe my uncle, I also try to see him for what he once was, a kid who, like many others, was duped by the system and was too young and irresponsible to make the right choices. By the time he was 16 and joined the Sea Org, he was already in too deep. He made his choice. I don't know who he would be if he had never encountered Scientology or how much of his personality is shaped by Scientology. And I wrote in the margin, generous, that I thought Jenna was being very generous to her uncle. A little bit further down, the problem with Scientology is bigger than one man, not just Uncle Dave or LRH. The problem is Scientology itself. It's a system that makes it nearly impossible for you to think for yourself. And I wrote 100% on that too. Guys, we're almost there. Okay, next page, 394. Halfway down. Tempted to help them realize what's going on and bridge the distance between their world and mine, I open my lips to speak, but each time the words catch in my throat. What stops me isn't fear. It's the knowledge that I can't force them to believe anything that they are not ready to believe. And she's talking about when she drives by some of her, or sees some of her friends walking around or people that she knows in Scientology. And then down at the bottom, I made a choice that I didn't want to be controlled. And in walking away from everything, I learned the value of listening to the voice in my head telling me what was wrong and standing up for what was right. I'm so proud of her for growing into that, because she's still relatively young in this book. And then the whole last page, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but she's talking about the gift of freedom and how, you know, in the long run, many others will appreciate your courage, even if silently, and someday it may lead to them mustering up the courage to stand up for themselves. And then she says, of all the gifts my freedom has given me, perhaps the greatest was the ability to start a family. From the moment I began spending time in Australia with Jeanette and her daughter Eden, I knew that I wanted to be a mother. However, if I stayed in the Sea Org, I would never have been allowed to. Leaving gave me the opportunity to discover for myself what it means to have a child. And today, Dallas and I are thankful for that we got out young enough to have kids and start a family. Our two beautiful children are a blessing that we never would have otherwise known. For me, the ultimate beauty of humanity was shown to me when I had my first child. Our bodies are capable of creating miracles, regardless of whether we are spirits. In the end, I learned that just being my body was good enough for me. My body allowed me to be a mom, which is by far the best thing about me. I thought that was such a special way to end her book, that she discovered her value and her true worth, not just as a mom, but as a person, but in something that she would not have been allowed to do had she stayed in the Sea Org. It just seems so, I don't know, destiny, you know, that was her destiny to be a mom. So that's the book, Beyond Belief by Jenna Miscavige. I want to thank everybody who participated in live chats, or even if you were on the replay crew later. If you like what you have been listening to and watching, please subscribe if you're not subscribed already. Hit that like button on your way out, and also push the notification bell so you can get notified when we have another session. So we're going to start next Wednesday with The Bad Cadet by, can't remember her name, Katherine Spallino. So we're going to do The Bad Cadet. I have not decided yet if we want to do half the book. It just seems like a lot to do half at a time in a week. I might break it up into 3 sections again, around 100 pages or so each, because that's manageable for me. I have a hard time just even getting that done sometimes. So let me know if you're going to do The Bad Cadet with me. If you have it already, or if you need to order it. I know they have it at Amazon. I got mine in 2 days, so I thought it was pretty quick. I think there is a Kindle and Audible version as well, so you should be able to get it, you know, either way you like there. So thanks again. I have Sandy says she has become a wonderful mom. She has, and I'm sad that she and Dallas didn't make it, but it's so common for Scientology marriages to not last outside of Scientology, just because they're not getting married for the right reasons when they're in. And then thank you, Sandy says. Annette says thank you. And Annette says I have it on Kindle. Great. Awesome. So I hope you'll be joining me for this one. So next Wednesday, same bat time, same bat channel, The Bad Cadet. I think I'm going to stick with the first 100 pages. So if you want to get started on that, we'll just stick with the first 100. So it's a manageable chunks for us to do on a week-to-week basis. All right. Thanks so much for joining me, guys. And hopefully I will see you next week as we do The Bad Cadet. Bye.